Yo, what is up everybody, it's Joe the Great here and welcome back to another Naruto reaction video here today. And today we have a very interesting topic by the Great Six, and as you can tell by the title this is, was Itachi really always a good guy? So folks, what I can extrapolate and imply from this title itself is that Six seems to be questioning whether or not Kishimoto had the intentions for Itachi to be this heroic persona all along. Right, and that's a good question. Was that always Kishimoto's intention? Or did Kishimoto have a change of heart when he was writing the narrative of Naruto, and more specifically when he was working on the character development of Itachi? We can't really answer that question. We can try to interpret what took place in a certain way to maybe make the argument that Kishimoto had that intention, or maybe had a different intention and really wanted to make Itachi a villain for Sasuke to triumph over later on. But I am very intrigued to see what Six has to say about this one and what exactly this video will entail of. But before we begin, any love is greatly appreciated. Hit that like button, turn on bell notifications to stay updated with yours truly. And if you're new and you enjoy, man, you mess with the kid, make sure to hit that sub button, because once you do, become part of the family forever. But let's not waste any more time, screen. Let's see what Six has to say about this one.
After the climax of the long-awaited Itachi vs Sasuke fight, Sasuke is taken in by Obito, who had sent Zetsu as a spy to record the entire fight, and is seemingly told the truth about his big brother, Itachi, by Obito's word. And most of Obito's story checks out, at least when it comes to Itachi, as we have Itachi himself confirm this later when he's revived in the Fourth War by Edo Tensei. When Obito is referring to the Madara points of the story, he's wrong a lot of the time, but that's not really important. The important part here is that he's seemingly spot on about Itachi's intentions, and even if every single detail wasn't correct, the general idea that Sasuke killed someone who was in reality just a good guy dealt a bad hand by life. It would seem as if Kishimoto covered his bases for this fairly well, going out of his way to make Obito say things about when Itachi appeared in the story to make them seem like acts of heroism or protection shadowed by Itachi's acts as an Akatsuki villain. But was this always the case? Was Itachi truly meant to be the good guy we know him as now? Or did Kishimoto change this narrative from how he was in part 1 and the beginning of part 2 in favor of this more likable, caring Itachi? That's exactly what I'm going to be determining here. But before we get into it, I'd like to ask you to leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel if you like Naruto content, but let's get started. Around a year ago, I made a video on Naruto's lack of plot holes, and in it I mentioned how I thought Naruto had little to no plot holes, and my exact quote was that I thought it only had one. I've mostly since changed that opinion, and some of the things I'll get into this video are probably plot holes. Just a fair warning before getting started. But while determining if Itachi was always meant to be the bad guy, let's take a look at all the actions he took or words he said throughout his time alive as part of the franchise to see if it was all really smoke and mirrors. Our first time meeting Itachi is in chapter 141, but our first time seeing him is on the first page of chapter 139, having a dialogue with Kisame, where he calls Konoha pathetic for suffering such a heavy loss against Orochimaru's invasion when it was once such a prosperous village. This is something Kisame immediately takes note of as out of character for Itachi to mention, and he follows it up with two questions: if Itachi still has feelings of affection for his old village, and if he even has nostalgia, to which Itachi responds, no, none at all. Looking back on this statement with the alleged retcon in mind, it would seem as if Itachi let out his true feelings for a moment upon seeing the village he used to call home in ruins, which would track with Kisame's statement. Itachi mistakenly dropped his act and then lied about it when he actually meant the statement. There are other things about this small interaction that can sort of paint a picture for how Itachi normally acts towards Kisame. Kisame's "even you have nostalgia" question comes off like Itachi normally is very cold-hearted when they normally interact, although we're not told how long Kisame and Itachi have been partners at this point. We just know that they do have a pretty good gauge of each other's power ceilings, as Itachi tells Kisame to back off Kakashi's clone because he couldn't win the fight without suffering massive damage, or Kisame mentioning that Itachi, after using Tsukuyomi on Kakashi, ran the risk of overusing his eye. We also get a good glimpse of those in charge of the group. Itachi normally orders Kisame around, and Kisame listens without questioning those orders. This could be due to a few things, just speculating. Remember, I'm speaking from the perspective of someone reading the story for the first time, since I'm trying to get a genuine idea of what Itachi was supposed to be like at first. The OG Akatsuki could have had leader then assistant type pairs instead of just the two-man cells. Itachi and Kisame could have shared info about their abilities so as just to work better together. And they maybe had been working together for a long time and came to find that out along the way. Or Kisame knowingly concedes to Itachi's power and just follows his command for that reason. Regardless, you more or less get the point. There is a lot to take from that first interaction, but I'll try to be more concise moving forward so we're not here for like an hour or something like that. Soon after this statement, we see Itachi in a tee shot with Kisame, seemingly not doing anything, and prior to Kurenai and Asuma approaching them, they seem to just be going to leave the village, which we later learn is because they were tracking down Naruto, who they found at a ramen shop but didn't attack because Jiraiya was with him and they weren't trying to start a war by fighting, obviously, in the middle of the village. This tracks even with Obito's later statement of Itachi being a pacifist. What, however, does not track with this is that his fight with Kurenai, Asuma, and then Kakashi afterwards, Itachi could have just retreated here as he does towards the end of the fight before Kakashi even showed up. This, on top of the fact that he went out of his way to put Kakashi in a coma, is also weird. You can sort of explain the Sasuke one, which I'll get into a little bit later, but this is just a explicit act of evil that could have been 100% avoided. Of course, Itachi after this is heavily fatigued and tired, and he retreats to go find Naruto again.
I might disagree with that point, and here's why. Here's why I might disagree with that point. Itachi has to keep up this undercover act, right? He has to keep up this undercover act. And he has to make it believable enough to where Kisame specifically doesn't become suspicious. So him just simply retreating from a challenge would have surprised Kisame. Or at the bare minimum, make him think a little bit, right? Because as we see previously, when he's speaking to Itachi and he asks him, do you have any sort of affection towards the leaf? He says, no, none at all. Why would he simply just retreat from a challenge if he feels nothing for these people? Kisame knows he can deal with a couple of Jonin in the leaf. He knows that. Kisame knows what he's capable of, which is why he defaults to him during critical situations, like against Might Guy. Right, so it would have been a little odd for Itachi not to engage whatsoever. To him, what was probably going through his mind, again, we can't prove it, was, okay, so we have this threat here, right? And I should keep up my act, so let me put some pain on these guys just a little bit. Now, someone would counter me and say, well, why did he go so far with Kakashi and nearly kill him? I would simply just say to keep up his image. So much, in fact, that Kisame probably thought Itachi had killer intent, which would just further prove his statement when he says, no, I have no affection towards the leaf whatsoever. Which is why he went that far. What I see from Itachi, a commonality with him, is that he makes sure to keep up his undercover act to the point where he almost kills people. He beat the hell out of Sasuke the first time they had an interaction, beat him down to make sure Kisame noticed, and Kisame did notice. He said, well, you're as cruel as ever. He made sure to keep up that act, right? If we presuppose that that was happening at this point and that Kishimoto had this intention in mind. So that happening isn't really a contradiction to me. It can be argued. I won't say that it's not impossible to argue that Itachi almost killing Kakashi could allow you to deduce that he was evil at the beginning of Naruto in part 1. That's fine. But the point is, it is contentious. Let's continue, though.
Next time we catch up with him is just prior to his interaction with Naruto, where he is talking to Kisame in seemingly the middle of nowhere. This is just Kisame being concerned about taking on Jiraiya, and while Itachi being drained from Tsukuyomi is just saying that he has a way of getting rid of Jiraiya so they can get directly to Naruto, which we later see is Itachi putting in jutsu on a woman to hit on Jiraiya, which Jiraiya sees through and shows up in time to save Naruto. In this interaction, Itachi was going to allow Kisame to cut Naruto's legs off so that he couldn't run away from them. Then after this, he puts Sasuke under Tsukuyomi and makes him live out his parents' death over and over again while in the genjutsu. This one, like I said, can sort of be explained by Itachi maybe knowing that Jiraiya was searching for Tsunade and knowing that she could heal the mental strain put on Sasuke and wake him up out of his coma, which you could retroactively apply to Kakashi as well and say that why Itachi did it to him, but at least in Sasuke's case, we know Itachi wants him to gain more hatred, and this Tsukuyomi definitely allowed him to, do that. But with Kakashi, as far as I can see, there's just no justification for Itachi doing that. So using Tsukuyomi on two people to mentally cripple them, putting them into a coma, forcing a woman to hit on Jiraiya without her consent, allowing Kisame to dismember Naruto, as well as murdering his entire family aside from Sasuke. I'll just say Itachi is really convincing as the bad guy at this point. After this, we don't see Itachi again outside of the flashbacks of the Uchiha massacre, which I'm going to cover in this video, but not right now. Even though Naruto timeline wise, chronologically, it should be right here. But in the literal last chapter of Naruto Part 1, we see him surrounded by his other quote-unquote Akatsuki members, in which absolutely none of them, besides Kisame, bear any resemblance to the Akatsuki we would later come to see in Naruto Part 2. I think the whole point of this originally was supposed to be that Itachi was the human monster who slaughtered his clan and entire family, alongside these actual monsters, because it simply can't be disputed that these Akatsuki members, outside of Kisame and maybe Sasori, resemble none of our future Akatsuki members that we see in Part 2.
Right.
This scene also bears what would seemingly be a plot hole, and it's actually my entire reasoning for even questioning this or starting to make this video in the first place, in which one of the Akatsuki members claims that the last time they all gathered like this was around 7 years ago when Orochimaru left the organization. This is an extremely important detail. If you have not been paying attention to the video so far, you should start paying attention from this point forward. This is an extremely important detail to point out, because in chapter 140, Orochimaru tells us why he left the Akatsuki, and the reason given is that Itachi was simply too much stronger than him, while showing a panel of his severed hand, bearing the Akatsuki ring. Meaning that 7 years ago, Itachi forced Orochimaru out of the Akatsuki. If that's supposed to be true, it would mean Itachi, who was 17 at the end of Part 1, was 10 when he first joined the Akatsuki, but that doesn't make sense because of another piece of information we get. We're told by Kakashi during the fight with Itachi in Konoha that Itachi became an Anbu Black Ops captain at the age of 13. Even if we take novel continuity into account, in which Itachi is actually revealed to have been 12 at the time of his ascension to Anbu captain, it still wouldn't add up with the timeline and only add more confusion, since we're given the actual time Itachi joined the Akatsuki in that novel, and it's after a conversation with Obito, just like in the manga. So looking at this from this angle, it makes literally no sense at all. There is the possibility that this Akatsuki member is just wrong and Orochimaru actually left the Akatsuki around 4 years ago to make the timeline consistent, but skipping from 4 years to 7 is a pretty weird gap, too weird for me to be charitable to for sure, but that's not the only thing. In Naruto Part 2 or Shippuden, which is 2 to 3 years after Part 1, we're given another statement about Orochimaru's departure, and we are told that it was 10 years ago. So yet another source claiming Itachi joined the Akatsuki at 10 or 11. This is also coming from Kisame, and I'd like to remind everyone that the earlier statement, which was 3 years prior to this one, said Orochimaru left 7 years ago. And we can all do simple math. 10 minus 3 is 7. So this Kisame statement actually corroborates the one said years ago by the other nameless Akatsuki member. Meaning, so far in the story, we're expected to believe that Itachi was 10 years old when he first joined the Akatsuki. Now, this on its own isn't too massive of an issue, as you could simply imply that Itachi joined the Akatsuki prior to his departure to the Leaf Village, following the massacre of the Uchiha clan, and was both a Konoha ninja as well as an Akatsuki member. Which, if you're reading this from around 2008 to 2009 when these chapters were releasing, you'd be at no fault for coming to this conclusion, as the story has completely laid out the groundwork for it to be a logical conclusion that follows. However, the issue comes in later when we're told that Itachi was a Leaf Ninja until 13 and not an Akatsuki member until after he left the village, which is exactly the problem with this. I'll get into Itachi's other actions in part 2 in a bit, but as of right now, this time alone issue alone creates a plot hole that puts extreme doubt in my head that Kishimoto had this all thought out from the start. And on top of it, all up until Obito's revelation of the truth, literally everything makes sense for Itachi to just be a bad guy. And it makes far more sense than him having any sort of good bone in his body, yet it's played up as he planned this all along and knew all the moves that he would be making. I think now is a good time to mention that I don't hate this plot twist. I think it actually makes Itachi one of the more interesting characters in the franchise, and it did far more good than it did bad, especially when you talk about how the franchise is successful as a whole. And I can't even call it lazy writing, because Kishimoto works hard to cover his tracks on this, and outside of the timeline statements that we're given here, he does a fairly good job. But just a throwaway line or two about Kisame and Sasori maybe being bad with time, and you got this plot hole completely covered. But anyway, let's move on to Itachi's actions in the Uchiha massacre flashback, and then his actions in part 2. The Uchiha flag.
Alright, I want to say this real quick before we get to the next tangent. I see what Six is saying, and that is actually a revelation to myself, right? The timeline issue and the timeline inconsistency with 4 years, 7 years, 10 years, and the age of Itachi making these statements inconsistent, right? That is actually pretty interesting. You could argue it's a plot hole, or you could rationale your way out of it with a good rational argument. That's possible as well. But despite that, I don't think that the fact that that could be a plot hole necessarily proves that Itachi was a bad guy in part 1. So just because that's the case doesn't mean that Kishimoto had the intention of having Itachi be a bad guy at the beginning, right? Those things aren't necessarily mutually inclusive, right? They're not mutually exclusive, but they're not mutually inclusive either, 100%. Right, so it is debatable. From what I can see, based off Itachi's persona and his actions, they're all very, very explainable and understandable as far as him trying to keep up his undercover persona to the Akatsuki and Kisame specifically. Right, so despite the timeline inconsistency, that doesn't necessarily prove that Itachi was a bad guy back then. And from my perspective, I wouldn't even say it even proves it beyond a reasonable doubt. I don't think it does that necessarily. From my perspective, again, this is all ambiguous and contentious. And our perspectives could definitely change on this because it is inconclusive. There's no absolute correct answer to this question, right? It is contentious. And whatever side you pick, I don't blame you necessarily. But let's continue on.
Flashback is just how you'd expect it to be during the time of reading or watching Naruto for the first time you go through it. Itachi seems like a troubled kid who inevitably we all know is going to go on a murder spree and kill his entire family. Itachi seems distant throughout the entire story, and he even monologues about being done with the clan after seemingly being pretty guilty for the murder of Shisui and assaulting the police officers who accused him of the crime. Let's look at this through the lens of someone who's read or watched the entire series. Itachi is upset that his friend just unalived himself and now is being accused of killing his best friend by 3 police officers, and in a fit of rage beat them up for accusing him. He then thinks the clan is doomed and there is no way to save them, because at this point he knows of the coup d'etat and has had his meeting with Konoha and already been presented with the idea of having to kill them for the sake of the village. So he makes up his mind here. That's all fine and good, makes sense, but why fake Shisui's suicide note? As far as we know, it's never been cleared up that Itachi didn't fake Shisui's suicide note. There's nothing written in the novel, databook, anime, or manga that implies Shisui wrote one himself or told Itachi to write one following his demise, so why do it? The only thing I can think of is Itachi wrote it to make sure there isn't any suspicion that any other Leaf Ninja did it outside the clan, because at this point, like I mentioned earlier, he should still be trying to save said clan. Obviously, my thoughts earlier should indicate that I think the original intention for this was just for Itachi to be an evil bastard who killed his friend and faked the suicide note, got mad, and when he got caught. But like I said, Kishimoto does well covering his tracks. Other than that, the rest of this is just how it is. Regardless of why Itachi did what he did, he still murdered his entire family and left only Sasuke alive after putting him in Tsukuyomi. He also tells Sasuke to amass tons of hatred and encourages him to get the Mangekyo Sharingan by killing his closest friend and blah 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 evil man banter. There is one last thing I want to mention about this though, but it's not revealed until later into part 2, but Sasuke tells us that he had suppressed a memory that Itachi was actually crying during this day. So yeah, do with that what you will. Now we're moving on to early part 2, because Itachi's actions after chapter 397 don't matter since he's revealed to be a good guy, and all his actions from there on out when he's revived are just the acts of what a good person would do. This might come as a surprise to some people, but Itachi doesn't really even talk much in Naruto part 2. He has a few lines, but none of them really indicate that he's evil anymore. At this point, he's more so calmed down, and I think Kishimoto was steering us in the direction of him being a good guy. But he doesn't really say anything. There's nothing really to dissect at this part in the story. Right. We do know that he gave Naruto the crow, which eventually led to him getting broken out of the Edo Tensei, but it was originally meant for Sasuke. And looking at the context of this, it doesn't seem too bad to think that way. He also mentions to Naruto how Sasuke is a blank canvas and he can still be dyed any color. So at this point, it's not all too clear that Itachi is still evil. So I don't really feel the need to go over it anymore. Outside of obviously whenever he's literally lying to Sasuke about taking his eyes and whatnot, he's doing evil things there. But other than that, he's more or less just a villain because we know he's a villain. He doesn't even help Kisame in murdering the Four Tails. So like I said, it's not all too clear that he's still evil at this
definitely
point.
Not.
And he's just more so chilling rather than earlier where he was running around beating everybody up. But that's all for the video.
Every video is always 6 interesting
please
concept
leave a
for
like
sure.
and subscribe to the channel. And other than that, have a nice day.
All right, there you guys have it, folks. I definitely want to get my thoughts on this and my take on what I thought Itachi was from the very beginning. So, what I believe is Kishimoto, right, this is what I believe from my own subjective lens, had this intention all along. He wanted to paint this canvas to us at the beginning to make us believe that Itachi was a bad person, right? That would explain the more heinous acts, right? Which is why he crippled Kakashi, why he beat down Sasuke, and why we find out he killed his clan. We know nothing else of the matter besides that. I believe that was Kishimoto's intention, despite the timeline inconsistencies and the years inconsistencies with him joining the Akatsuki, when exactly he joined, Orochimaru's defeat, with him making him leave the Akatsuki, etc. I still think that Kishimoto's intention was to make us believe that Itachi was this monster that Sasuke wanted to take down, right? I think that was the whole intention, which is why in part 2, Kishimoto makes sure that we see Itachi in a different light, right? We learn more of his actions and why he did what he did, specifically with the Uchiha massacre. The idea of morality. The way he writes the narrative with that is set up in a way for us to inevitably question the morality of Itachi's actions on whether or not they were righteous or not, whether he made a noble choice or not, right? The whole idea of avoiding war and an overall higher number of casualties is why Itachi decided to just kill his clan, essentially. He wanted to save Sasuke and avoid more bloodshed, right? And it was clear to him that Danzo had his mind set out on either eliminating the Uchiha by means of war or having someone that's already within the inside do it for him, which is where Itachi came into the equation, right? So his morality can be deemed righteous if you take the philosophical take called Kantianism, right? I might be butchering the name, but the whole idea behind that type of philosophy is the net good versus the net bad. What would have a higher net good? A war between the Leaf and the Uchiha where tons of people die on both sides, or just the clan itself being extinguished and massacred? Which one would result in more net good? Well, the clan being eliminated, right? Because there's still more lives that are present with that course of action. If Itachi would have said no, Danzo would have started a war between the Uchiha and the Leaf, and there would have been more bloodshed. So the net bad would outweigh the net good in that situation. So that was Itachi's philosophy in a nutshell. He wanted the net good to always triumph in his decisions. And the reason that he made sure to traumatize Sasuke was so that Sasuke could become powerful enough to defend his home, to defend himself, and to become the hero that Itachi was never able to become in the eyes of most people in Konoha until later on, obviously in part 2. That is why Itachi beat Sasuke down, why he made sure to traumatize him, etc. That's why he did what he did. Now, is Six's take on this not correct? You can't say it's correct or not correct, because there's no absolutes in this. This is extremely contentious, right? But I tend to believe, from my own subjective lens again, that Kishimoto deliberately and very deceptively created this narrative for Itachi. He made us believe Itachi's a terrible person at the beginning, and then later on revealed to us that he was actually a noble individual that was undercover all along. Right? We learned later on. We get these revelations that enlighten us to the true nature of Itachi Uchiha, to his true moral compass. He's not just this psychopath that wanted to eliminate his clan because he hates them and that he believes he's superior to them. I do think that he has flaws, though, and I think those are very easy to determine if you analyze his character. I do think he had somewhat of a god complex, not to the extent of Obito or Madara, but I do think that towards the end of his life, he becomes aware of that. He does become aware of that, especially when he's talking to Naruto in the war arc. He says, you know what, you can't do things alone, basically implying that that's what he did wrong. He's like, I try to do everything and, burden the weight on my shoulders and do everything myself to make sure that everything went right, but I was wrong. I was wrong. I went about it the wrong way, and I didn't value the aspect of working in conjunction with somebody else or with other people to create a network where everything works better and where more noble outcomes take place. That's what Itachi's flaw was. So yes, he did have somewhat of a god complex to some extent, but I do think his nobility far outweighs that. It far outweighs his flaw, morally speaking. Right? So I think Itachi is just a very, very complex character, and the very fact that we can question whether he was evil or not just illuminates how well written he was by Kishimoto. That's what I think. The very fact that people question, was he really a good guy in part 1? The shit he did was pretty messed up. This is very, very good writing by Kishimoto. Very good writing. Again, there's no way to prove that I'm absolutely correct, or there's no way to prove that Six is absolutely correct, but what we can say is that Itachi was very well written. Which is why he's one of the most revered characters in not just Naruto history, but anime history in its entirety. His name is used synonymously with the biggest names in anime history. Goku, Aizen, etc. He's in that rare air as far as popularity and reverement of character. That just illuminates Kishimoto's brilliance. Truly. I think he wrote Itachi beautifully from my subjective lens. I really do. And I really do think he was a good guy all along. And again, from my own subjective lens, that's the conclusion I would come to. But yeah, folks, I think that's going to wrap it up. This was a very interesting concept and actually a very interesting thing to think about, and admittedly debatable as well. It really was interesting, and great logic from 6, great observations, and I would say extrapolations from the canonical literature available. He did a good job with that and definitely put some things into question I think should be put into question. I do. Let's kind of wrap it up though, folks. Let me know in the comment section below what you think about this whole concept. Do you think that Itachi was evil in the past and that Kishimoto retconned his moral compass later on? Do you think that I'm on the money about it? Do you think it's something else entirely? Is he a more morally great character to you? You let me know all that in the comment section below. I'm always intrigued to read your guys' thoughts. But let's gonna wrap it up, and I'll catch you in the next one. This is Jay the Great signing out. Peace.